Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of the tutorial. In this second half, we're going to continue to add detail and touch up anything that needs it. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I'm going to do is try to clean up some of the edges on this mountain. A lot of times when you paint, edges will get a bit messy. So a way to do that is to just go with the eraser tool and just kind of carve your edges, just cleaning them up, getting rid of some of those transparent sections, as well as cleaning up any blurry edges. And this also kind of lets me shape the mountain the way I want to. There we go. I'm going to switch back to my brush and sample using Alt. And a lot of times when you start adding higher detail, you're going to want to use a smaller brush just to kind of add little bits of variation and clean up the bigger strokes, because the bigger strokes are nice for quickly getting down color, but they're usually pretty messy when it comes to fine detail. The size of your brush will kind of depend on your canvas size, but something generally pretty small works. And I'm just very quickly moving my hand and lifting the brush off the tablet and then placing it back down. So it's just quick little strokes. And you can see that the side of the mountain here is looking a little bit better already. Come over here, sample some, and then I'm going to increase the brightness a little bit more and tilt it a little bit towards the redshift. And that will just help brighten up the colors a little bit more to add some perhaps highlights from direct sunlight. And just kind of place it here in the middle. Like so. Maybe there will be a few hits over here. Maybe this piece over here wraps out a little bit into the light. And I'll brighten it up just a little bit more for those really bright highlights. And I'm going to use those sparingly. Maybe there's some rock edges that stick up in a way that catch the light directly. And you don't want to overdo it. That last bit is a little bit too much. So I'm going to do that. Just kind of even it out over here. And again, I can use the method where I'll paint over something, then sample it to adjust my color palette. I'm going to come over here to the dark side and just do the same thing, adding some detail. Trying to define how this mountain kind of slopes downward, and adding in some little faces and variations to the rock. And I'll sample some of this grass down here, or foliage. And I will be adding trees down here in a little bit. Just trying to have it lead upwards. Maybe it wraps around a little bit here. Just trying to define where it kind of really shifts from the light side to the dark side. Gonna come up to the snow. And I'm going to do the same thing and add a little bit of highlight. Close to where the mountainside is being hit for highlights. And snow is usually very bright, especially when it's catching direct sunlight. If you've ever been outside in the snow and you come inside, you're almost blinded by how dark everything seems. And that's just because snow is so bright. Just coming around here, making a little edge here to where it shifts to the dark side. It's coming up to the top, and I'm going to select my rock color again and just add a little bit of that back. Going to clean up this edge a little bit more. There we go. It's starting to look pretty good here. Let's come back in, adding a few more highlights. As well as several dark areas. I'm just going to come in with my brush and add some varying strokes. Rock does have a lot of cracks and breaks in it and lines that will kind of break up faces. So just to kind of help sell the realism of this rock side here, I'm going to continue painting with darker color, making horizontal strokes almost. So I'll just kind of squiggling my brush around my brush. And I'm going to help kind of define this edge over here against the background. Just continually sampling off of what I've already done. Next I'm going to come to the background here and kind of touch up these four mountains. Let's clean up here a tad bit. And I can see where it's still in the cloud layer here. Just going to sample here and kind of paint up words. Now give this a little more definition. And sample my snow and add that back in. That's a little too dull, so I'm going to increase the brightness of the snow. Kind of defining where the snow sits. Kind of tapers off as it gets towards the base. I come back to this mountain. And I'm going to want to add a little bit of haze to the distance here, just to kind of show that this is going off into the distance. And there's going to be a bit of atmosphere between, say, you and this mountain here. So I'm going to call up a new layer, and I'm going to name this Haze. Now I'll bring up my brushes, F5, select my soft brush, and I want the flow to be about 20. So I'm just going to drag this down, or I can just type it in 20. Because I want to be careful with how I add this. I don't want it to be instantly too bright. And I'm just going to sample off the sky and then take the saturation out. And just kind of a medium brush. Just kind of hold shift and drag. That's still too dark, so I'm going to brighten it up some more. And that's a little too bright. Just a matter of kind of playing around with things. Kind of want this to taper off about here. And I'm going to go along the horizon line and add a little bit more. And that looks pretty good. I'll come back to my land And I'm going to sample this line here. I want to brighten this up a little bit more. Just very slightly adjusting the hue. So I do want to define where the light is just kind of hitting the ground. Just going back over what I've done. And again, just kind of following along where I've already defined where the highlights will be and kind of layering this on top. I don't want to cover up completely all the original highlights that I made, just to help add a little bit of variety to things. There we go. Select the screen again, kind of go in here. Just kind of breaking up this area. And I'm playing around with the levels a bit, just trying to adjust the brightness. Just trying to see if darkening it down will get more of a look I want. And I'm going to adjust it just a tiny bit. Next, I'm going to add the trees at the base of the mountain. But I'm looking at my brushes here. I don't really see anything that I like. I'm going to go ahead and try to create a brush that will kind of help me create the trees. So I'm going to come up to File, New, and I'm just going to make it 500 by 500 and hit OK. I'm going to reset my colors with D and fill it with white using Control Backspace. I'm just going to make a new layer. And I'm just going to try to define my tree. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just something that will kind of help me. And this will just help me save time. And I don't need anything too highly detailed. I'm not trying for a photorealistic look or anything in particular. Plus, it's a bit in the distance, so it doesn't need to be completely accurate. You know, just getting the basic definition of a tree. And adjust trunk a little bit here. And then I'm going to go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. I'm just going to name this tree. There we go. And now I have a tree brush. I'm going to switch back to my main painting here. And I'll make a new layer. I'll call this Trees. And now I'm going to make a couple adjustments to this brush, because if I try to paint with this, it's going to look terrible. So I'm going to click on Transfer for Opacity Jitter. I'm going to turn on Shape Dynamics. But I don't want to use pen pressure for this, so I'm going to turn that off. I'm just going to turn on the Size Jitter and a slight Angle Jitter around this jitter. I'm also going to turn on Flip X Jitter. And then I'm going to come down to the spacing and just kind of play around with it. And I think I'll turn on Scattering as well. And turn the count up to 2. And maybe there's a little too much angle jitter. I'll just test that out. And that seems pretty good. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger again, just for now. And I'm going to go back to my brush presets, and I'm going to save this as a new preset, because I don't want to have to redo that every time I use this tree brush. I'm going to hit new preset and name it Tree Scatter. I don't really need this other brush, so I'm going to click on it and just kind of drag it to the bin. And now I'm ready to paint. I'm going to sample off my green here and select a darker color and just kind of come in, try to figure out how these trees are going to line up here, and that's still too a little bit bright. So I'm going to make that darker and more saturated. Now I'm going to come back in, and that's looking pretty good. Just very lightly painting in the trees. You know, I'm not worrying about them looking perfect. And this might be a little too big, so I'm just going to delete this. And I appear to be working on the layer again. You know, I've said it before, it's very easy to do. I'm going to just call up a new layer. Name it Trees. Just kind of paint over what I have. It won't really make a difference with this. Maybe there the mountain is too steep for trees to kind of rest. I'm just going to have them kind of go off here. And maybe have some in the midground here. You know, maybe there's some trees. Kind of to help break up this big empty space here a little bit bigger. It's going to be pretty small at the distance. Kind of define a little bit of a forest in the distance. And now I have all these trees, but I need to define some highlights on them since the sun will be hitting them. So I'm just going to turn on the lock transparent pixels. And I'm going to brighten this up a tad. I'm just going to very lightly paint over some of what I have done. I don't want the full brush just because I want more of the tops to be highlighted. Like so. And that seems pretty good. Next thing I want to do is add some visual interest to this space over here. I think it's just a little too bare. So I'm going to add another tree. And a great way to show scale and distance is to kind of repeat objects. So I have this tree here in the foreground, and I'm going to add another one here, sort of in the distance, just to kind of show how things fall into the horizon. So I'm going to make another layer. I'm going to call this mid-tree. And I'm going to select my chalk brush, and I'll select up the tree and try to find a nice color for this. And this seems okay for now. I can always adjust it. And trees are not like you drew when you were little with just the trunk and then the big bushy top. They usually break off into branches before you reach the leaves. So maybe I'll have it split up this way and this way. Just add little branches in. And I'm not going to worry about, you know, drawing a tree exactly, because when you do start adding the leaves, it will cover up quite a bit. I need to put this in front of the haze. I'm just going to try to detail the trunk a little, select a darker color, and just painting little variations on the trunk. Like so, and I'm just going to grab my scatter brush again, and I'm going to select the green color, dark green, just to get the base. And I'm just going to start painting in the top of the tree. Just kind of define how it would look. Just kind of adding leaves to where the branches kind of, setting leaves to where the branches kind of split out. Maybe add a little bit up here. And this also adds a little bit of a structure against the horizon line, so you have this nice dark tree against the sky. I'm going to shrink this just a tad, like so, and bring it a little bit closer. And I'm going to add some highlights to the leaves, so I'm going to brighten this up. Kind of go over the top. And I feel the trunk is just a little bit too bright, so I'm going to hit Q to bring up my quick mask and select my fluffy brush again, big round brush. Just kind of highlight the bottom of the tree and hit Q again, and then Control-Shift-I to invert my selection. I'll bring up my curves with Control-M and just darken this down quite a bit. And the tree's here, but it doesn't look quite right because there's no shadow coming off of the tree. So I'm going to go to my land and just kind of select a round brush. I want that one. I want the one without the shape dynamics on, and I'm going to lower the hardness to about 15%. And I'm going to select a dark blue color. And just very lightly paint in a shadow and the direction of the sun. So it's kind of going off in this direction. And there'd be some shadow from the canopy. Just try. And that looks pretty good. And come back to the tree itself. Just trying to add some variety to it. Now, this lake is looking a little bit funky, and so what I've gone and done is found a reference and of an actual mountain with a lake, just to kind of see how that compares. And so references are an important part of painting. You know, don't let anyone ever tell you that using a reference makes you an amateur, because you can't know how to paint something if you don't know what it looks like. And when you use references, you don't want to copy them directly. You just want to kind of take a look at them. So I'll bring this back up and say, oh, that's how, say, the water would sit, or how it would reflect. And then you can kind of incorporate those into your own painting. So you can see that in the water there's a much bigger reflection, and I don't really have that here. So it looks a little bit glassy and flat, and it doesn't look very much like water. So what I want to do is I want to add the reflection of my mountain to my lake. So I'm going to come down to my land layer, and I also want to combine it with the trees, since those are a part of the reflection. I'm just going to select the two layers by holding Shift, and then I'm going to drag and duplicate them by dragging them to the new layer icon. Then I'll hit Control E to combine them. And the reason I did that is because I do want to keep those layers separate, but I want to use the combine selection to create my reflection. I'm just going to come in with the lasso tool, and I'm just going to quickly kind of make a selection around what I want. Doesn't have to be perfect. There we go, and I hit Control C and then Control V. I have this layer here. I'm going to drag it above the water. I'm just going to call this reflection. And I'm going to clip it inside of my water layer. I'll hold Alt, and then when I move the mouse between the layers, it turns into this icon. I'll just click, and now this reflection layer is clipped inside of the water. So now it only shows up in this water. And I'm going to do that real quick, and then hit Control T. I'm going to right click on my transform and hit flip vertical. I'm just going to kind of drag this down and adjust it to kind of where I want. Bring it down a little bit more. And it's not lining up perfectly, so I'm going to hit up Control T again, and this time I'm going to click on Warp. And I'm just going to bring this edge over here upwards. Just trying to line it up along the shoreline. And again, reflections will usually kind of point towards you, because that's how the light bounces, so that's how you're seeing it. And that looks pretty good, so I'm going to hit Enter. And now I want to blur this a little bit. Just because there usually won't be a perfect reflection, but that's not always true. Sometimes you do get a really mirror-like reflection. But for this, I'm going to just use motion blur. And I want to point it 90 degrees. Trying to find a distance that looks okay. It just breaks up that reflection a bit. That seems pretty good. I'm going to lower the opacity a tiny bit and darken it down. Like so. And maybe adjust the opacity just a little bit more to about 70. That seems pretty good. I'm going to come down to my water and I'm just going to play around with the levels on this. It's a little bit too bright for me. So I'm going to darken it down. Just drag the left end here and maybe play with the middle a little. And that looks a little bit better. And I'm going to take a big soft brush, sample my water, and then make something darker. Just come right along the edge here of the shore. A bit more saturation. Just kind of darken it a tiny bit more. Come along. Just add a little bit of edge to the lake. I'm going to try something. I'm going to try going over the middle a little bit, just very lightly. Lower the flow to about 20. Kind of come over here. Like so. That works pretty well. And reflection, I'm going to try setting it to soft light. Now just play around with blending modes. You won't always get something you want, but sometimes you can get pleasant results. There wasn't really anything in there that I wanted, so I'm just going to leave it on normal. And now I want to touch up on this front foliage. It's looking a little too painterly and like brush strokes. I'm just going to come back in. I'm going to sample off the green and darken it a bit more. I set my flow back up to 100. And I'm just going to come in, try to define the grass and stalks a little bit more. Go over things that look really sloppy. Let's come in, adjust my brush as I go. And just, add some more to the distance here. So maybe it trails off a little bit as it gets farther away. Maybe there's some that goes in the water. Come over here to the side and add a little bit more. And just go in here. And I'm going to go ahead and speed this up a little bit, just because it is a little bit of a slow process. It's the same simple stroke with the brush, but it is a little bit repetitive. There we are. And I just want to add a couple cattails to this. Trying to find a nice color. Let's add some variety to the grass. Maybe a couple over here. And I'll adjust the color so it isn't one flat color. Maybe some highlights on them. There we go, and that looks pretty good. And now I'm going to come in here to this area in the foreground. Just the bright green against the grass here doesn't look quite right. I'm going to come down to my land again. And I'm going to sample off this brownish color I have here. Darken it a bit more. And I'm just going to add a little bit of angle jitter to my brush. And just kind of go in with loose strokes. And really try to darken this down a bit more. Just because there wouldn't be quite a bit of light coming through the grass. It will be in a lot of shadow. It's a little too dark for me. Brighten it up just a bit more. Maybe make it a bit more brown. Come back up to my foliage. And select that yellow color again. And I'm just going to add a little bit of that back in. Now it'll be just add variety to the color, so it's not just green all the way around. And I'm going to go back over to the side here. And I'm just going to add a little bit more. Now just to kind of show it kind of tapers off as it goes. That looks pretty good. And the last thing I want to do is to kind of just touch up the edges of the mountains over here. And I'm pretty happy with the clouds as they are. So what I'm going to do now to kind of finish off the painting is to add some adjustment layers to kind of really touch up the lighting. And, you know, it just really adds some ambience to the scene. So I'm going to come up to the top of my stack. I'm going to hit Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to select Curves. And I'm going to drag this endpoint over here. And this marks the highlight. So when I bring this down, you notice the canvas gets darker. I'm just going to drag this literally down just a bit and put a point towards the middle and just drag it very slightly. Because I don't want to add a lot of contrast to what I'm doing. And now that I have the layer mask selected for this layer, I'm just going to hit Control Backspace to fill it with black. And that'll use my background color, whereas Alt Backspace uses your foreground color. And I'll select my soft brush again, and I'll set the flow to 20. I'm just going to kind of come around and darken the corners a little bit, and maybe come up here just a tad. Because the light's coming in from this side, so I just kind of want to darken down and create a subtle vignette effect. And then maybe I'll come on this side of the mountain here and use the same layer and darken this down as well. We come in here, this little nook in here, and darken that. Just kind of darken this side of the mountain. And as I turn that layer off, it's subtle in a way, but it does add quite a bit. And I'm going to do the same thing with highlights. So I'll create a new levels, name it for curves, and I'll slightly drag this up. And I'm going to drag up the red a tiny bit and lower the blue. That'll give it more of an orange tint from the sun streaming in. And I'll fill that with black as well. Come in to the side here and just kind of have it stream in to the painting. And you see it creates this nice glow effect. And if I turn these two layers on, it still looks nice, but it looks a little bit more flat. And so what doing this does is just kind of add some atmospheric and depth to the painting. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to come in my land here, turn these off. And if you do go to do more editing, you usually want to turn off those adjustment layers just because they can mess with your painting. Whenever you sample off a color, it's going to select that new adjusted color and it'll keep adding to itself. I'm just going to darken down over here a tiny bit more. Bring my flow back up to 100. There we go. And turn these back on. And I think that's going to do it for this tutorial. You know, just something basic to kind of help you get started in the right direction with painting. You know, from here I'll try to do some possibly more advanced settings. But I hope this was helpful for you, and that'll be it. So like, favorite, subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.